We're going to talk a wee bit more about getting strategic with digital. So we're going to really fundamentally talk about what needs to be at the core of a good digital strategy and what's the role that your board has to play within that. So I'll go through slides fairly quickly so we've got lots of time for discussion. My contact details on the first slide and the last slide. Be good to connect with people after this. Also, if there's any questions, then just give us a shout. I spend most of my time working with boards and senior teams on developing digital strategies. And I guess what I'm going to talk to you about today is what makes the building blocks of that stuff. So, what and why? The Charity Digital Skills Report, if you've not seen it before, I would urge you to go and have a look at it. It's a really good way of framing the discussions in your organisation and reflecting where you're at with digital at the moment. I'm not going to go through the list completely. A couple of things that are worth picking out, I think, in there, 48% charities have a strategic approach to digital. I think that's probably quite generous, to be perfectly honest. If you kind of delved a bit deeper on how many of them have something coherent that people have agreed on and that their staff understand, that number might be a bit lower. More than half of boards' digital skills are either low or have room for improvement. This is where Digital Trustees comes in, and we'll talk a wee bit more about that. Again, more than half charities want a clear vision of what digital could help them achieve from chief execs and boards. So we know that staff and volunteers and service users and supporters want this stuff and are crying out for this stuff. And 43% of charities would like their CEO, board and leaders to embed and develop an effective digital strategy. So what is it? It is not a fixed plan that's going to tell you how to use digital tools and technology. It's not something you agonise over for 6 months, get signed off, and then everything's fine for 3 years. What we're talking about here is something that evolves as you go and really is underpinned by a simple vision for your organisation. And for me, an easier way of thinking about this is something that's aligned to your organisational strategy and probably is more likely to look like a work plan. And really fundamentally, a lot of the building blocks of that are the same for almost every organisation. The difference will be where you're at in that journey, what your budget is, what your capacity is, what your confidence is, what your staff skill set is. I'm going to talk about some of those elements as we go through these slides. So before we do that, what I'd like you all to do is think about a time that you had a good experience online, so a good service experience. That could be anything from maybe you're lucky enough to be able to book your GP appointments online, maybe you returned something recently and it was really smooth, maybe you had to chat to your bank, maybe you had to renew your road tax, anything at all. Think about the last time you had a good service online. And what I'd like to do is describe what made that service so good in one word. So just in the chat box, pop in there the one word that describes that service that you had. And it can be anything at all, personally or professionally. Come out of slides so I can actually see the chat box. That'd be useful. Both people, that's quick. Nobody's ever that quick. Usually I have to like prod people to put stuff in, right? I'll pick out 3 of them. So there's a lot of quicks in there, right? Joe, you were first up. Understood. What was your one?
Yeah, mine was understood. Yeah, I think it's that you're not being bent to their processes. They've thought about who you are, what you need to do, and how you might interact with it. So yeah, you're not being forced into the path that they want you to take.
Yeah. It's a brilliant one, and that notion of like your users not having to adhere to your organizational structures that often are weird and wonderful in third sector organizations, but actually what do they want and need and what's their user journey and what does that look like? And that might cross over different services that you offer. Ravelli, you had one, it was quick. What was your quick one?
It's usually when I need to return something. But I find that I don't know if it's called the web chat. It's easier and quicker just to speak to somebody on web chat if you've got an issue or something, rather than like the email, because you get like a response within 24 hours, which is still quick, but it's a lot quicker if you just talk to somebody one-on-one. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'd like to all be thinking about. It's very easy. The conversations often go at boards. Well, digital's fine, but we don't want to remove that human touch. And actually, a lot of the time, what we're not talking about is removing that human touch. And if anything, getting good with digital and being able to make efficiencies actually allows you to spend more time with the people that you really need to spend time with. And I think particularly for me, like advice and information organisations, the potential there to free up capacity. So I've done quite a bit of work with the Citizens Advice Network in Scotland, and actually that ability to think, well, if someone's got a really complex case and we need to speak to a housing officer and someone at Shelter Scotland and 2 other agencies, but we treat every person that walks through the door the same and they get the same time slot, but the 17 people who walked through before could have self-served and they had the same question as 17 people the day before, we're doing a bit of a disservice to people that really need our help and need it at depth. Right, okay, Wendy, we'll finish up with you. Yours was efficient.
Yeah, it was a time where I contacted somebody online in terms of where I purchased something or trying to purchase something, and like Raphael said, it was just knowing that I could have a conversation, a chat with somebody there in there, and then they were able to answer questions or give me links to somewhere else, other services. It wasn't that I had to wait for things. Like sometimes, you've got to wait for somebody to come back to you with the information. They had information there and then at hand. So it was very efficient and things got done, quickly.
Excellent. That's a really nice example. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing there. Now, what I'd like you to be thinking about is, if you think about those words, so quick and easy and efficient and understood, and we talked about that ability to speak to a human really quickly, does that reflect what digital services look like for your organisation, whether that's internal or external? And if it doesn't, how do we aspire to get to that place where stuff is easy, quick and fast, and that our users feel as if they're understood? How do we move away from that potential of the first thing that people see is a website and then they have to go 7 pages deep? Eventually they find a contact form, they fill it out and they send it off and it goes into a black hole. Nobody knows who it's gone to or when they're going to get a response. And then the person's sitting for 4 days, and then maybe if they're lucky, they get a phone call or an email comes back from someone who they don't know who that person is, and they don't know what that person's going to do with their personal information as well. And so how do we essentially take what we're doing in our day-to-day lives in 2023 and how do we transplant that to the way that we operate as third sector organisations? Right, I'm going to go back in the slides. I'll kind of go through these fairly quickly so we can have time for a chat. So I've always found this quote quite useful. As trustees, this applies to everything that you do, but I think particularly important to digital data and design. Don't transform to preserve the how, transform to match the why. And this is a really big opportunity to get back to the fundamentals of why your organisation was set up, and not to put a sticking plaster on a paper-based process that's now suddenly a Microsoft form, but why are you doing the work in the first place, and keeping that in mind as a trustee. For those of you who are not trustees in the room, that's really the thing that your trustees should be focused on. So how do we get started? As a starting point, what I'd like to think is helping your trustees to understand that digital is everything. So potentially at the moment, the conversations around digital in your organisation at a board level might be sitting that it's simply IT infrastructure, or it's how we use social media to communicate with people and get more users. And what I'd like you to be doing is changing that narrative where digital is everything that you do. So it's not just your website, not just IT, not just social media. It's how you deliver services, it's your HR processes, it's how you manage and use data, it's how you collaborate and communicate, and really permeating everything that you're doing. And there's a really good toolkit. There's a few of these that are out there at the moment, like NCVO and SCVO have got one. We did some for the body in Wales. You can click the link on the slides. I'll share the slides at the end, by the way. So slide 8 allows you to access the toolkit, and it's got these kind of 8 component parts. Now, generally, when you're thinking about what are the elements of a digital strategy, what are the things we need to be thinking about on a board and as a senior team, these are the things that come up time and time again. So digital inclusion, data for decision making, service design, service delivery, cybersecurity, how you communicate and collaborate as a team, digital skills and training, which we'll talk about next, and then leadership and culture. So this is quite a good way of thinking about how are we addressing these kind of 8 core components at the moment, where are the areas where we need to spend a little bit more time and effort. So 2 things that you can do, and you can start this week. So a staff digital skills checkup, there's a link there to the SCVO one. That will allow you to get a real good handle on what are the skills and confidence of our staff and our volunteers as well when it comes to digital, so that when we come to make any changes, we know where our staff are at in this journey. We know the training and support they need to get more confident. And also as an organisation, you can take a digital maturity checkup, and that allows you to benchmark your organisation, understand where you're at in this journey, and think about those core areas where you need to make more efforts. So both of them are free to use, both of them really simple. There's a few digital maturity checkups. That link will take you to the SCVO one. There's an NCVO one. I'm sure Pauline will have some others up her sleeve as well. Right. I've still no idea why I chose this cow for this slide, but I still kind of looked the panicked look on its face there. So where is the digital strategy template? The bad news is there is not one. There's a good link there to a blog from John Fitzgerald at SCVO talking about why a digital strategy template is actually worse than useless. Now, what we've seen, or what I've seen a lot of organizations do, is they take some kind of cookie cutter strategy or template and then they try and shoehorn their organization into it. And it's not about having the right conversations, and it's not about aligning what you're doing with your organizational strategy. So your overall organizational strategy or business plan is going to drive what you do with digital. You might not even call it a digital strategy. That is fine. So what you're better off understanding is what are the big choices and questions that you should be asking. Start by asking why. There'll be lots of stuff around digital that you shouldn't be doing. There'll be lots of stuff that you should be investing in that you're not investing at the moment. But ultimately, your end goal in this is not a PDF. I worked with quite a big social care charity where they got a consultant in, they spent £40,000, they took a year to develop a digital strategy. At the end of it was a PDF that was 330 pages long. When I came in to work with the board and their senior team, nobody on that senior team had read that strategy because it was 330 pages, and how on earth could someone read that and actually do something with that? So what we're thinking much more about is something that is quick and nimble, built around a vision that's really going to drive you forward, but ultimately is built around bits of work taking place. Now, your bit of work might be we're going to aspire to get Cyber Essentials accreditation. Your bit of work might be we're going to do the digital skills checkup with our staff next week. A bit of work might be that we don't really understand our users very well, so we're going to spend some time training our staff on user-centered design principles and some really simple workshops that they can run with the young people that we work with. So much more about vision, alignment with your organizational strategy, and then actually doing some stuff. So what should you write? We've touched on a lot of this stuff already. Your vision, key goals and objectives, making sure it's aligned with your organizational strategy. Be really clear about the blockers that you've got as well. So if you have no money, be really clear about that in the strategy. If you have a staff team who have very, very poor digital skills, be clear about that in the strategy. So you need to operate within, I guess, a kind of a real world picture of where your organization's at. Underpin this stuff with data and user research. So that might be your own data, but it might be data that's in your local region about how older people use the internet, and that's going to influence the work that you do. Prioritise and outline the actions that you'll take. So what I mean by that is who's going to take responsibility for it. You in this room might have oversight, but actually you might need 5 or 6 different people across the organisation who are going to take off those different elements of that work. Think about the different ways that you might document this stuff and share it with staff. So that could be a Trello board, use Notion, a Jamboard. I've put a link there to the business model canvas, which is a really nice, simple framework that you can use to start a digital strategy. But ultimately, it needs to be a living document that you revisit regularly. So you might do some work with staff. It might get signed off at a senior team and a board level. It might get announced. What you might find is as you start to practically implement it in 3 months' time, it might get changed and you might tweak the vision. All of that stuff is okay. So what you're not doing is admitting failure. You've essentially got a living document that you're going to come back to and you're going to tweak as you go. Right, so digital trustees. I think I put a link in the chat box. If I didn't, I'll pop it back into the digital trustees page on the Third Sector Lab website. Essentially, we run matchmaking events every couple of months. We had one this week on Monday for Trustees Week. We'll have one again in January. You can sign up for the updates and those, and I'll put the link to our WhatsApp group as well, where you can have a wee chat with other people working in this space. But really what we're trying to do is matchmake people from the tech sector with third sector organisations who need that stuff on their board. Hannah's one of the kind of standout examples of someone who's recently joined a board and made really quick headway with that organisation. So if you go to the link, if you go to the Third Sector Lab website, which is thirdsectorlab.co.uk, click on the Digital Trustees tab, you can find out a wee bit more information. You can also see our matchmaking platform. These are just some of the people that are looking for trustee roles at the moment. Also, what I'd urge you to do as an organisation, you can put up an organisational profile as well, and people like Jen or Bunmi or Danielle can see the organisations who've put up recent vacancies, and they can get in touch with you. It's deliberately very light touch. So when you click that Find Out More button on Tom's profile, it will tell you a bit about Tom, his background, his expertise, the kind of causes that he wants to be aligned with, and then you can reach out to him usually via email or LinkedIn. This is about starting that conversation. So you may or may not have a formal recruitment process in place at the moment. That is okay. And what I'd urge you to do is there's probably going to be at least 2 or 3 people there that align with what you're looking for. Go and chat to all of them. Take an hour in your diary, have a chat with them, and then start that process if you want to through that formal recruitment process as a trustee, the same way that you would do with anything else. And we'll get on to, when we come into the discussion, we'll talk about the types of people. But at the moment, we've got a few service designers, data analysts, we've got web developers like Jen, we've got people working online comms, we've got IT infrastructure experts. There's a really broad range of people. So the term digital trustees is a very catch-all term for a lot of different skills. And what you need to be thinking about as a board is what is that gap and what is that need that we have right now. So your need might be that you've had a massive cybersecurity scare and you need to do something about it. You don't have anyone on the board who's leading on this stuff. And maybe you've got a fine for something that happened and you weren't GDPR compliant, and maybe you're going to create a 1-year board position and you're going to get a cybersecurity expert on the board for a fixed term of a year who can take you through that journey and ensure that the organisation is much more cyber secure. Right, we'll chat very briefly about user-centred design because we've talked a wee bit about it already. This is a really nice way of thinking about this stuff. So this is about service transformation enabled by digital, not digital transformation. The term digital transformation can be a bit scary for staff and a bit unhelpful for a lot of boards, where it feels like we need to make colossal changes, rip up the organisation, make massive financial investments. But actually what we're thinking about is what are the ways in which we do the things we do, and where might digital support us, or where might it offer better ways of understanding users, and where might it offer efficiencies as well. And what I'd like you to be thinking about is, even if you don't call yourself a service organisation, every organisation provides a service. Your HR function internally is a service. If you're a membership body, you provide a service to your members. So moving out of that language that we're often guilty of in the third sector, where a service is a face-to-face service to a person, and actually thinking about everything that we do as a service. If you're interested in exploring this a wee bit more, the double diamond from the Design Council is a really nice way of thinking about it. It's not really as linear as that looks, but the fundamentals are there. So we need to spend much more time discovering and defining the problem, understanding the why, before we move to the what bit. And what a lot of charities have been guilty of, and usually because they've been missold something by a consultant or an IT firm, is immediately accelerating to that end point. So our staff don't communicate and collaborate, and we're not very good at it. So we don't spend any time discovering why that's a problem. We immediately rush to commissioning a £20,000 intranet because we just think the bit of technology will solve the thing. And if you're interested in this, if you Google the Scottish approach to service design, there's much more information. There's loads of resources and tools, some really simple principles that you can get started with this in your organisation. Right, so here's a good question to ask at your board. I'm not going to run through this slide because I need to drink some coffee. But really thinking about, how do you centre users at the moment? What does that look like? If it's purely focus groups and the occasional survey, are there better ways of doing things? And again, we can kind of talk about this when we come into the discussion, in ways that you can do this stuff fairly quickly and simply. Right, the final bit I think that I'm going to chat about is this notion of reuse or flexible technology. Richard's quote there kind of sums it up better than I ever could. But what we're doing is, it's 2023. We are moving away from thinking that we have a very, very unique use case and that we have to go and commission someone to get a CRM or an online chat platform or a volunteer management platform. We're going on the assumption in 2023 that someone else has solved this problem and a cloud-based off-the-shelf tool works, and that we can integrate those tools to work with each other. Now, as a starting point, if you're not sure where to start from this stuff, Catalyst have got a really, really good reuse tools. There's loads of shared digital guides with lots and lots of examples. So things like running group support sessions using video calling, gathering feedback at a venue using Typeform. There's literally, I think there's well over 100 now in there. You can do a search, so you can search by like tool type, by the thing that you're facing as a challenge. So there's some good stuff in there about managing volunteer expenses using an app. whatever you're facing at the moment as a challenge in your organisation, there's a good chance there's an example on that site of an organisation who've already done this stuff. And really what we're thinking about is, if we can reuse something, we can save huge amounts of time, and also we can avoid a lot of the pitfalls that an organisation has already gone through, and we can take something and we're 80% of the way there. We're never starting from scratch. We're never just putting something out to tender and fingers crossed the market will solve that thing for us. As I said, I'll put the slides link in chat. You can click a link on slide 20 and you'll get to those. I think Bob Barber, who was head of digital at Shelter, solves this stuff really nicely. So pick a problem, solve it in as cheap a way as possible, do it 10 times, and you'll wake up to find you've built a whole new system for a fraction of the cost. And really that kind of sums up this kind of, I guess, exploratory phase that you need to get into with digital. So you need to be thinking about, it may be small things that you start with. So it's maybe that your staff fundamentally across the board hate the way that they find out about their holidays because they have to fill out a Word document. It takes ages to do it. They have to give it to their manager. The manager sighs every time they do it. The manager gives it to someone in admin, and maybe 2 days later the person finds out how many holidays they've got. Wouldn't it be great if that person could self-serve online and you removed all that faff out of the process? So what are these problems we're trying to solve both internally and externally as an organisation? Right, so how do you capture this stuff? This is a really simple thing you can do at your next board meeting or senior team meeting or your staff meeting, but starting to craft a draft vision statement for your organisation around digital. I'm not going to read this stuff out just now because it's on the slides, but I really like the one from Parkinson's UK because it covers both what they're hoping to achieve internally and externally. And this is a really, really nice way of doing it because you're giving that clear message to staff. This is about the ways that we work being more effective, but also the ways that we support the people that we're trying to work with being more effective. Bernardo's one really focused on service design and being user-centered, no mention of digital in there at all. This is a very, very shonky one from Victim Sport Scotland. I did some work with them a couple of years ago. This was actually from the woman that came up with this was, I think, 67. She's a volunteer, been a volunteer for Victim Sport Scotland for I think 20 plus years. This one we did some dot voting in the day. There was a big room full of volunteers, and this one won. And I thought in a sentence that encapsulates where Victim Sport Scotland are trying to get to with digital. So crime isn't restricted to office hours, and neither are we. So moving out of that mold of you need to turn up to an office 9 to 5, or most of the cases it's 10 to 4, Monday to Thursday. And actually, how do we become much more user-centered and focused on what those people need who are victims of crime, rather than shoehorning them into our structures as an organisation? So you can take this slide 26, think about this discussion. Now, this is not going to be fixed in stone. You need to involve your users and your staff, your stakeholders. But as a starting point, at your next board meeting, what would that vision statement look like? How do you start to then develop that over time as you involve more people in that process? So, sum stuff up. Document is not your endpoint. It needs leadership, but your staff need to champion the strategy. It needs to be grounded in user needs, and we can talk a wee bit about that when we come on to the discussion in a second. And reuse is your friend. Assume that the technology that is going to solve your problem exists already, and someone has already solved that problem. You just need to find out who that someone is. And the biggest bit of advice is just start. So this will feel colossal. Some of you will be quite far in this journey. Some of you will feel like you're at the start of it. But think about what is that first thing that you're going to start with. Right, got a chance for questions. I've also in the slides, so on slide 30, when I share the slides link, you can scan that QR code and you can join the Third Sector Geeks WhatsApp group if you're interested in taking this conversation further after today. Right, I'm going to shut up so I can drink some coffee.
Great. Fantastic, Ross. That's a whistle stop tour, as I'm sure you'd say yourself, but and extremely valuable. And the people that are on screen, most of them have been to other events that we've run, and they're I think have a mindset towards this, and I think that's what we're kind of trying to build towards. But people are at various ends of the scale. Hands up, who in the room actually has ever been a trustee or has trustee experience? Okay, so some people don't, so it's it's that it varies, but so people either have digital trustee experience or digital experience or both. And I think we're working towards kind of meeting in the middle somewhere where what makes sense. We always say in our presentations to the constituencies. Each constituency is at a different level, it has different needs, and people are trying to respond to those needs. But I think digital trustees can help in various ways. And so I think, you know, you've presented lots of useful information that'll give people a lot to think about. One of the books that I'm sure you're aware of is this book called Good Services by Lou Downs. This is one that's quite easy to read. I think it's written more for a public sector audience, but good services are good services. I think the questions you asked about services are very pertinent to discussion. So yeah, open to the floor. Who's got a question for Ross, or a comment, or an observation, or, you know, what did any of the slides make you think?
Joe's got her hand up.
Hello.
Joe,
Hi.
hi.
Yeah, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. There's so much in there, and I think, like your point about it feeling colossal and overwhelming, but actually breaking it down into little things we can do. Interestingly, our board have got a kind of a priority this year around cybersecurity. So I think we're all very focused around, you know, digital being about cybersecurity. But I loved the those blocks that you presented. I think that's a really good way to start the conversation with my board, to say it's everything. And so I think that's something I'm going to do. And I think that I'm just reflecting on the whole digital trustee thing, because I think what you said about almost like creating a position for maybe 1 year is a really good approach, and having that person who just gets it and can like bring the board along with them. But equally, I think it's really important that everyone feels that ownership. And so rather than it being like that trustee deals with that. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on sort of, I mean, this, if I could bring you to our board meeting, that would inspire people, I think. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on, like, if you've got a board who kind of don't have that view of what digital could be, you know, would you start with those blocks? Or I feel like jumping into the digital vision statement might be too much too soon. I kind of want to lead them in somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always happy speaking to boards. So if anyone wants me to chat to the board, I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah, I think, you know, there's Tom Loosemore's statement on what digital is, I think, is a really good starting point. I did actually have it in my slides, but I kind of took it out just for brevity. But I'll, if you give me a second, I'll get it for you. Right, 2 seconds. I'll put it in the chat box, and then you can all shamelessly copy and paste it and pinch it. So there we go. So applying the culture, processes, operating models, technology of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. And basically, so that exercise that I got you all to do of coming up with a word around your last good experience of digital, all that we're thinking about is, as you start to recruit new staff, and as new service users come forward, and your existing service users, and your members, and whoever else that you're engaging, the people that are giving money to your organisation, they're all using digital in their day-to-day life. And what does that look like and feel like for them? And actually, there's this weird thing where boards operate in this. I think we've tried to use the excuse of digital inclusion as a way of not really getting on board with a lot of this, because it's felt scary, and we're like, well, we work in some of the poorest communities, and therefore we just won't do digital because we know that people that we work with use digital in this way. And actually, a lot of that stuff is even out of date, preconceived ideas about how people are using digital and data and the types of devices they've got. So I think as a starting point is, like, the definition of digital needs to be clear so that everyone's got a kind of shared own definition. But anything where it feels like it's anecdotal or it's kind of prejudiced information needs to be challenged, and it needs to be backed up with user data and user research. And so a lot of the boards that I speak to, like, I got probably a talk that I did recently with housing association boards, and almost everyone in the room, so it was quite a big conference, everyone in the room was maybe 60 plus, and it wasn't, and I'm not being ageist here at all, but they were the conversations that they'd all had at a board level. And I think probably the way that digital is dealt with in that organisation is, like, they don't want the board to touch digital. They want to just get on with digital. They don't want the board meddling with that stuff. So everyone in the room universally was like, oh, we've got a company that deals with our IT. Someone deals with our emails already. It's like, but that's not what we're talking about here. And it's like, you're having to take quite a few steps back. So sometimes it's that kind of shared collective understanding that when we use the word digital, actually, here's what we mean. And moving out of that space where it's the company that deals with their IT, or where it's the person who's got a part-time job looking after their social media channels. So that is a simple starting point, I think, is important. But it also needs to come with challenging preconceived ideas about either your staff or the people you work with or your members, because there will be a lot of that on your board, probably, I would argue. I don't know what your board looks like, but most boards have that. I don't know if I answered your question there at all, Joe. But
No, that's really helpful and spot on, actually. I think, yeah. I had another question, if I can, just as a follow-up thing. So our charity, the people that we support are volunteers that run very, very small micro organisations. And, you know, there's loads in your presentation thinking about, you know, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be really quick kind of little things that you try. So I suppose more of an observation, or I don't know if you've got anything to add in when we're looking at tiny, not even boards, management committees, not even, you know, they haven't even gone down the road of registering as a charity. What works, or what, you know, what might be ways that this could be looked at on a smaller level?
Good question.
yeah, that's a good question. Could you give me an example of what you have in mind of that?
Maybe like maybe it's all volunteer led. There isn't a staff member. I'm just thinking of like a Friends of a Park or something like that. So there's lots of activity.
Yeah, I think for me, there's almost something of like the foundations need to be there before you start to get in, because lots of people rush to like, they're like, you know, particularly with the advent of AI, it's like we're going to rush to the very exciting, shiny stuff. But they, you know, they're still using a Hotmail address to communicate with local schools about the park that they've got. Or nobody on the board has any clue about cybersecurity or GDPR. And so those fundamentals need to be there. Some of the fundamentals might be, you know, Pauline showed the book Good Services. In that book, there's like 15 principles of what makes a good service. And what I find is like lots of boards think the organization's quite user-centered. And then I say, well, what are the principles that underpin what user-centered design looks like for you? And they're like, what do you mean? We just are user-centered because we listen to our users and we speak to them. Okay, but so if I was a development manager in your organization and I came to you and said, I've got this new idea for something, there's no way of scrutinizing that because there's no framework of what good looks like. Now, the framework might literally just be the checklist in the book Good Services of the 15 things that make a good service. So that for me is the thing that needs to be there, is like those fundamentals of good digital data and design that don't need to be very expensive or shiny, but like if people don't understand being GDPR compliant, there's still, you know, 8 people sharing a Hotmail address, and you know, there's loads of stuff that you can be doing for free, and those fundamentals need to be there before you even embark on something else.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think that staff digital skills checklist could be done for a volunteer group as well.
Totally.
And I'm always encouraging the people that we're talking to know where they are themselves with digital skills, because a lot of people know more than they think they know. So doing a checkup like that gives them some confidence. And trustees, they should know where they are with those kind of skills. Oh, Wendy has to go. Okay, sorry, Wendy. See you soon. You know, we all need to we need to know who we are. How can we start our journey if we don't know where we are? We need to, you know, to where we're going. So I would encourage us all. I'm certainly going to be looking into that myself. You and I, Gina, are going to be completing that and see how we get on.
Any other questions? I think Joe's typing away there.
Is there anything in the chat?
It was just a comment to add to Pauline as well. I think applying that skills audit in a really like open, non-judgmental way, because I think it's almost like maths used to be back in the day. Like no one wants to admit that they just can't understand the board finance papers, and I think digital's a little bit. It's almost like a judgment, a kind of personal shame, whereas actually, it's, you know, we're all at different stages and all have, you know, and I think your point about people knowing more than they think they know is a really good one as well.
Yeah. all links in the chat. Thanks, Ross.
I just
Carmel, did
realised
you
how
have a
weird so I was going to say, I just realised how weird the emojis are in Teams. That is terrifying, that space.
I agree completely with what Joe said, and thank you very much, Ross. I think you've given us lots to think about, and I would say with my trustee hat on, that, you know, historically boards have been made up of, you know, I know this is an overgeneralization, of older people, and sometimes there's almost a, you know, I don't have anything to do with that, like almost a sort of sense of that's, you know, that's not for me. I'm not going to kind of engage in that. Or is there not somebody else who can do it? And I think one of the things that really resonates is about it being a live document. It's not something you create, tick the box, you've done that, and put it in the corner and take it out to review in 12 months or 3 years' time, whatever it is. So I would say we've lots of work to do, Pauline, Gina, Harry.
I think that, yeah, and I was just going to say that analogy I think is really useful about, you know, if you've got a finance expert on the board, if I spoke to 100 members of a membership body and I said, like, who at the moment has a finance expert on the board, probably 90 out of 100 would. And the 10 that didn't would have some kind of plan for recruiting that person, because they'd be panicking because they're like, well,
Yeah.
nobody understands what the accounts look like and this is terrifying.
Yeah.
If I asked the same amount of people, do you have anyone who understands anything about digital, it would probably be quite a low number. And very few of them would have any plan for recruiting that person because it's not seen as an urgent
Yes.
matter. But we're living in 2023 and somehow digital's like a thing that we might do next year.
Yeah. And I think that point about how many parts of the organization is, you know, it embraces, and the why rather than the how is a really good starting point. So thank you. You've given us lots to think about. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
On the data side of things, Ross, can you say a bit more about that? Because I know some of us are interested in how we should be occupied with that, especially because as trustees, speaking now as a long-standing trustee, in various organisations, national, regional, and local, you know, we sometimes we're conscious that we're meant to be not in an operational, you know, we're not meant to be doing the do, we're meant to be guiding the do. How do we use data and step back from overstepping the mark as digital trustees?
Yeah. I mean, I think data is one of the tricky ones where it feels like you can just kind of skirt the surface of what this actually means and how you're using it. I'm going to there's a couple of links I'm actually going to put in chat. So there's Joe at Catalyst has written a really good blog on 7 tips on using data more effectively in your organisation. So I'll pop that one in. What I'd also urge you to do is go and look at what types of support schemes and volunteering schemes are there local to you. So like DataKind have a really good program where they can get data analysts to come and support your organisation pro bono. In Scotland, we've got the Data Lab who do a lot of work, and Scottish Government have a data analyst secondment program where they'll support third sector organisations. There's lots of stuff like that going on. It's just a kind of case of digging about and finding it. It's really tricky because I think a lot of the conversations about data fixate on buying a CRM system. And yes, you're going to need something effective and robust that's going to work. But there's this danger of like, we'll write a brief, we'll buy a thing, we'll go through an agonizing process and lots of money that we don't have of someone building a thing. And you kind of get at the other end of that, but still nobody's got really a strategic reason as to why you're using digital or how you're going to use it, or and that's it, just becomes another digital filing cabinet. So for me, it's like if you can start, you might have a bunch of disparate Excel spreadsheets that are kept somewhere safe, and maybe you're using them in the cloud, but that might be an okay starting point. It doesn't need to automatically be we need to buy an expensive thing that's going to solve this problem, but having some kind of notion is like, why are we using this information? What do we ask? And it might, you know, it's also that because there was a really interesting talk at the last Tech for Good Scotland event that we had, talking particularly about EDI and capturing EDI information, and actually that a lot of it has become really, really, really onerous But then if it's onerous as an organisation, how onerous does that feel as the person expected to fill that form out? And sometimes give quite personal details about your own circumstances and how you identify. And actually, we need to get better as at organisations as asking why we're capturing that. And that doesn't mean not capturing it, but it's like, well, what are you going to do with that disability information, and what's the change you're going to make off the back of that? And I think there's a danger with a lot of the EDI stuff. It's just we just capture stuff because a funder asked for it somewhere, and we don't really care as an organisation what we're going to do with it. And so, for me, a lot of the data strategy stuff is quite human. But if the ways in which you capture stuff at the moment are very, very messy, again, there's that foundational stuff. Because I mean, a lot of organisations, even big ones that I work with, it's like you go in and they've got a CRM, but you're like, this other team uses this Excel spreadsheet where they keep stuff, and then someone else keeps stuff on a fundraising database, and then someone else keeps all their stuff in an Eventbrite account, and there's just so many pockets of data and duplication and GDPR black holes. And I think it's a starting point doing some kind of mapping exercise, like where do we keep all this stuff? Why do we ask these questions? What does that look like? And that then allows you to take those next steps of what you're going to do a bit more strategically. But for me, getting a short-term board position, if you could get a data scientist to come on for a year and help you ask the right questions, that could be really powerful.
Okay. Ravelly, have you got any questions, anything that occurs to you for the board? I mean, how big is your board?
If I'm quite honest, I'm inexperienced with regards to that. However, Power, it's national, so it's quite a big service. But I was just thinking, like, I know obviously we've got some kind of digital stuff in place and whatnot, but there's always, I guess, there's always room for improvement, as they say. So yeah, it's definitely something. If it's okay, I'd like to actually pass this on to my manager, the recording. Is that all right by everybody? Because then she can bring it up a little bit further as well.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that's been said, I agree with us. When you said as well, Joe, with regards to the digital vision and stuff like that, as I said, I'm not sure how far we are, but it could be that we probably need to go back a little bit before we get to that point of doing making a statement of a digital vision. So yeah, it's been quite interesting. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ravelly. Harry, I'm thinking about the kind of small groups that you work with. As Joe said, some of them are like completely volunteer led. Do you think any of them might start thinking about having a digital trustee or two to help them think about what might be possible?
Definitely, I think my thoughts are there already. I think especially with community centres who already are providing digital services and already have board of trustees set up, they could really tap into these resources, sort of thing. And for information that's been shared today, I'll be taking it even to NCP, which has been really useful. But definitely something we can share out further.
Yeah, I think if we all do the digital skills audit, we might find that we are the digital trustee, or we are the person with the knowledge, or we'd like to be. We may be able to add something to our own, to acknowledge our own skill set, and then kind of put it up on our LinkedIn, and and see about getting involved with other organizations. I think it's a growth area. I'd say, wouldn't you say, Ross, that more, it's not, we're not way behind all other organizations. No kind of sector we're in contact with actually is more advanced, much more advanced on this than we are. We're still at a learning stage on this.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, almost there's a mindset on boards that the technology is shifting so quickly that you're not going to be able to predict what's going to happen in the next month, never mind the next few years. That's an okay space to be, but I think a lot of boards have become frozen by that concept because they're just like, I can't possibly keep an eye on the pace of this stuff, so I'm just not going to do anything, or I'm going to wait for someone else to tell me the thing that I need to do, and that's not an option. But it's also where networks like this are really important, that someone in this room will be doing something that you haven't thought about and that you should be thinking about, or someone else here's gone for Cyber Essentials accreditation and you're thinking about it and they can support you. And so using your networks where other people are at different bits in this journey and supporting each other is really important.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, the biggest thing that I would say is, like, as soon as your board has any conversation where they're just like, we're going to buy our way out of this problem, that's when, like, my biggest bit of advice is just put the brakes on it. I mean, I'm working with quite a big charity at the moment where they've hummed and hawed and gone back and forward. So basically they have a huge issue where their staff work across, I don't know, like 25 locations across the country. They don't communicate with each other. They work in tiny silos locally. So they've got a big issue around communication and collaboration. They set up teams. What happened was there's now 599 team sites where, like, people are now working in even worse silos where nobody has any control or understands what's going on in those weird little spaces. And so rather than going, well, fundamentally, do we even want people to work and collaborate together? Is it important? Why is it important? What would that look like? And they had conversations around that. But what happened was, well, that seems like a very long, quite difficult process and a bit too human. What we'll do is we'll put a tender out for an intranet and we'll get an intranet, and the intranet will probably solve that thing. And it won't. It'll probably make the thing even worse. But it's easy for a board to know what that process looks like, because it's like, right, we write a tender document, 3 people bid for it, they tell us a thing, and then maybe in 6 months' time we'll build a thing. Because there's still this mindset of digital is like building a thing. You spit out a thing at the other end, or you buy a thing. And actually, for me, that's the bit where having someone on your board who can go, whoa, let's just like pause on that. What are the big questions we need to ask before we get to that point? Maybe we don't need to build a thing. Maybe we've got the stuff already, and it's just about rethinking the way that we use it. We actually don't need to spend a penny at all.
Yeah. Right. We've got 5 minutes left in the meeting. Gina, have you got a survey or a poll or something that we were going to run? Are we going to do it now, or are we going to do it after the meeting?
I will just paste the link to this the feedback form now if people have time to just quickly do it now. It's just, I think, about 5 questions. If you don't mind filling it out to let us know what you thought about the session today, that would be fantastic. I'll be eternally grateful to you. So thank you.
Have people got any kind of final questions? I mean, Ross is very findable on social media, so I'm sure he'd be happy to, for people to follow up. Joe.
Just a really quick one about the digital trustees that you mentioned on the website. Is there any kind of, like, I don't know if training or information or kind of insights that they're provided with about this sector? Because I feel like it is it's a funny one sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the matchmaking events, we always have a kind of sector speaker who comes on and talks about good governance. And we always kind of like, we give people kind of onboarding resources around that stuff. What I would say is that anyone recruiting should really think about what their trustee induction looks like. I mean, I can't remember who did the piece of research, but there was a piece of research recently about the number of trustees or the percentage of trustees who get no induction at all. And they're just like, you're now on a board. And so there needs to be a better process for people understanding, like, what does it mean to be a trustee? What's my responsibility? Why is this board unique and different? And what do we do? So we have a certain responsibility for that. I think there's a broader need in the sector to talk about that. I mean, as part of the work, so we're going to tech companies and other spaces to recruit people, we will talk to them about it, because the long and short of it is the tech sector is still fixated on short-term volunteerism, where it's like they will come and save the charity sector that's a bit stupid and we have all the answers, which is not the case. And actually, for me, being a trustee is about, you're going to make a long-term commitment and you're going to take the time to understand the challenges that organisation's facing and the role that you've got to play in steering that. You're not going to turn up for 2 weeks, pretend you can fix something that's like a giant societal problem by building an app or a new CRM, because that's ridiculous. But that's often been the way that it's been approached in the past. And it's short-term tech volunteering is good for certain things. There's lots of things where it's actually counterproductive, and I would argue quite a destructive force.
Ross, there's one quite final question from me. The other organisation in the space that has some history of helping people to recruit digital trustees is Reach Volunteering.
Yeah, they're really good. I would urge you to go and look at them. Yeah. So what we don't do, we're not a recruitment platform. So so when you put a profile up as an organisation, or a person puts a profile up, that allows someone to make that kind of warm match. So that allows you to go and reach out to a person to say, I'd like a chat. If you come to a matchmaking event, it's 90 minutes long, it's very quick. It allows you to meet probably about 10 people working in the tech sector. Out of those 10 people, there'll probably be 2 that really align with what you're trying to do. the next step for you is to have a conversation with them and then go through those formal recruitment processes. Now, your formal recruitment process might be you put an application form up on Reach Volunteering, or you put it up on your own website. It's kind of up to you what you do with that, but we're deliberately not kind of touching that space. So ours is more about, I mean, the big thing for me is like board diversity, because the danger is most boards think they're tackling this, but it's like Jim on the board who has a friend who's a Microsoft IT reseller. Jim's friend Alan would be a really good person for this, and then Alan ends up on the board. Nobody questioned Alan's skill set or what the hell Alan is going to do. And actually, maybe Alan is the best person. Maybe he's not. But actually, too many Alans on boards. We need less Alans.
Great. Can I grab a photograph before we close? Just I took some as you were talking, Ross, but it's just good to have a final one where everybody's happy and kind of pleased to be on screen. So if everybody just gets a big smile, and okay, let me check that how that worked out. It's lovely. Yeah, brilliant.
I need to shut off because I've got a 10 o'clock, but thank you so much for having me. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you,
that.
Ross. That's brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we will make the recording available. Thanks again, Ross. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Emily. Cheers. Thanks,
and
everyone.
have a good
Bye.
day. Take care. Bye.